And now, after Alan, Sandra, Sam, and Jolene have all passed, my mother has lost her awareness en route to join Sam. I have been reflecting and wondering, is this the result of some purposeful, malicious action against our family? Outlandish as it sounds, is there some kind of big picture curse? Selfishly, is there anything I can do about my life to ensure I do not just turn off like they have so abruptly? Should I change my life in some way to leave a more meaningful legacy? Does some divine being have their finger on my exit button? Will they just press it? Have I lived to honor and show integrity that I have espoused to be my entire life? Are there any things or people I should address in some way before I am gone? Horrifically, who will notice when I'm gone? Who will weep, and for how long? Tragically, will my knowledge and wisdom be lost to my corpse in my grave? In the end of days, will humankind cease to exist the very moment that I do as the divine fulcrum? That would make me an existentialist, I suppose. I could only lean back in my chair to signal to Dr. Caselli that I was done with my long-seeming speech. Caselli, recognizing my body language of being finished with my presentation, spoke with his James Earl Jones deep gravelly voice. That's a lot to unpack, Richard. This is not the time to discuss those topics, but I have taken notes so we can talk about them in future sessions. It made me wonder, how many sessions does Dr. Caselli expect there to be? Well, it was not a question that I felt like asking him. It's probably infinite. It seemed like every time I expressed an opinion or asked a question of Dr. Caselli, he would respond, "This indicates some new problem I had, or otherwise must be suffering." So yeah, it was becoming clearer to me that speaking to psychiatrists may not be in my best interest here in the ward with the good Dr. Caselli, or his panel of experts. The doctor used my words against me, definitely not to help me. Again, Caselli looked at me as if expecting me to acknowledge his wisdom of taking notes. The awkward silence loomed between us. I did not feel like talking. It was apparent, though, that I had to say something or things would just stall there, I guess forever. "Okay," I replied. That was sufficient, as Caselli smiled, settling more comfortably into his big stuffed chair, and so I continued. I think it's worth noting that I have not dreamed when sleeping for a very long time. I certainly haven't dreamed in the daytime either. It's been years. Or at least I cannot remember that I dreamed. I remember no dreams at all. I swear they just stopped happening, which is especially odd. I previously dreamed all the time. I even acted out in my dreams physically and verbally. I would call out, I would swing, I would kick. My wife was not happy sometimes when I would act out. It's quite a contrasting change to where I am now. From many dreams to 0 dreams. From acting out dreams to completely still sleeping without any dreams at all. Like I said before, I no longer recognize myself in the mirror, which, although is sort of a big thing that we should talk about later, it's just something that I think speaks to my whole condition entirely. I know how you want me to describe who I am, so maybe let's not talk about what I'm thinking physically and talk about identity, I guess. So how do I see myself? Let me talk about what colleagues and executives have described me. I'm a go-getter, entrepreneur, genius. I'm logical, grounded, driven, luminary. Of course, they also might say, I'm relentless like a Terminator. I'm brilliant like Einstein. I can do anything. I am needed on the wall, but never in the White House. That I prefer a straight line to the conclusion as opposed to indirect, around, below, above. They think sometimes that I'm an elitist, and I have definitely been called unapproachable. And then there was my very special nickname during Electronic Arts that stuck with me to this day, Crispy Heart. I'm sure we'll talk about that later too. I was a workaholic. Did I mention that? I was frugal. I was a very frugal workaholic. I believed work hard and long hours, very long hours. In fact, one time my peak was 110 hours in a single 7-day week. You can do the math on that. That translates to extremely, very, very little sleep. One single stint spanned 3.5 days, non-stop typing and coding, no sleep. I ate at the computer. I did have bathroom breaks. When not at work, I usually worked at home. If I wasn't working at home, I worked on the home. Even playing games was a job sometimes, most times. I would deconstruct computer and video game designs and their implementation to better understand how I might do a better job. I did say workaholic again, right? I took a vacation every 4 or so years. I never became wealthy, but rose from literally welfare poverty to owning $1 million house outright and saved a decent nest egg for retirement. Any bonus or stock returns went to paying off debts, mortgage. Anything else just went towards investments. Any money I had was tied up in the house, retirement savings, investments, that kind of thing. I never had extra money on hand. I lived comparatively poorly on a daily basis. I always tried to be smarter with money, though, than go burning it on fun. I tried to spend it on things that mattered. Maybe I was frugal to a fault. Perhaps I missed out because I was so frugal. I mean, after all, now with my neurodegeneration, I guess I'm not going to benefit from any money I did save other than, fortunately, I don't have to work. So that helps. I can at least degenerate on my own, like a Don Quixote, run mad. Politically speaking, I am a conservative registered Republican. I have been my entire life. I believe the 3 greatest presidents in history were Donald Trump, Ronald Reagan, and Richard Nixon. They were all extraordinary on the international stage with negotiation and national economic policies. I know people don't like them for any number of reasons, but I have to say they were the 3 best presidents in my lifetime. Is that what you wanted to hear, Doctor? That was a lot to summarize there, I asked. Dr. Caselli, the renowned neuropsychiatrist from the Mago Clinic, had been observing me as I told him all that background. It was like he was studying more my expressions and body language sometimes than actually listening to the words I was saying. I suppose he could have been doing both. But I felt more judged for how I looked and presented than what I was saying, much less what was going on inside my head. I think this was the 3rd time we had this conversation, so maybe he did not need to listen very closely to me anymore, and was rather now focusing on how I said things, and maybe even making sure my story was consistent. Yeah, I had been locked up for over a week. Every single day I talked to psychiatrists or psychologists or ward administrators, and the occasional orderly, but every other day I spoke with the chief neuroscientist because apparently I am called a top case. Because, after all, I murdered someone. Worse, they assert that I am a racist because the thug I killed, defending myself, And the two seniors, from being mugged by him, happen to have black-colored skin. Apparently, if someone that is bad has a different color of pigment in their skin, that can change the justice that you are supposed to do. And therefore, I am a horrible murderer in the psychiatrist and apparently society at large's eyes. But wait, I did not murder anyone. I admit I did kill someone in self-defense, but again, apparently murder and self-defense, at least in California, are not dissimilar if you are an old white male. I am all those three things, and so I guess by that basis I did murder someone without justification. Obviously not. That's a bunch of BS. It's wrong. At least that's how I see it. Dr. Caselli stated in an almost fatherly, soft, but firm voice, "Richard, I have read your medical history in detail. I believe your problems are not solely, and may not even be, neuropathic degeneration. Your issues are more likely rooted in numerous psychological traumas emerging in late life, triggered by recently overwhelming, unsuppressible, traumatic events, or inescapable circumstances that are simply far too much for you to process. It broke you. Consider all the personal losses and deaths that you've had to overcome. Consider the traumatic events with your daughters suffering through divorce. Consider how you are coping with your mind and identity melting away. Consider your resentment and frustration with a delayed and ultimately terminal diagnosis. Consider the disappointment and the horror that you may not benefit from your life's hard work without a functioning mind. Consider how scary it is to possibly never be free from here. There are many things that we need to unpack and process, Richard. Fortunately, we have the time. Your breakthrough emotions and self-described emotional epilepsy are no more than these surfacing traumas due to your early neurodegeneration removing your executive function's ability to suppress them, as you very likely had done in your life before. But now, you can no longer suppress or bury your emotions because your brain has lost that functionality. The proverbial suppression dam has been broken that held back every other buried and tormenting, abused memory over your life. Everything is flooding back, and it broke you psychologically. So you see, Richard, like the movie Good Will Hunting, you're not responsible for acting on your uncontrolled emotions. However, we cannot, as a society, let you run around endangering people with your out-of-control thinking and behavior. Richard, you understand that it is possible you have more advanced neurodegeneration than we can detect. Your diagnoses are about your symptoms and the causes, both of them. It is difficult to know how much of your brain is comprised of Lewy bodies, ischemic strokes, hypoxia, plaque, or other more obscure conditions that we don't have easy ways to test for. There is definitely neurodegeneration, Richard. There are definitely psychiatric issues as well, regardless of their origin. It does not matter why you have these psychiatric conditions, Richard. The key here is that you have them. And you need to recognize you have them. You need to accept the fact you have them. It is a fact, Richard. You, Richard, suffer from psychiatric conditions and neurodegeneration. And Richard, You need to accept this as fact and accept the treatment that we prescribe. Am I making myself clear, Richard? Will you please restate what I have just told you? It was crazy. He was demanding that I basically betray my own beliefs. But what was I going to do? I was a captive. Sure, doctor, I replied incredulously. I knew he was trying to brainwash me into accepting his words by having me say the words myself. It was not about his knowing that I listened and learned. It was about manipulating and brainwashing me. I knew his shrink games. I suffer from one or more psychiatric conditions resulting from my brain degeneration. Is that good enough, doctor? I asked. I felt like the good doctor was trying to brainwash me with repeating things that he wanted me to embrace as my own thoughts. I imagined because I thought he was doing that, therefore it would not work on me. I thought that I had the resistance because I knew what he was doing. Of course, I also wondered, how do you assess if you've been brainwashed? If it's your own mind that has been brainwashed? It's an interesting problem. Richard, your recent behavior is associated with your psychiatric conditions, said Dr. Caselli. We need to understand everything about you, past, present, and your probable future. Without delving deep into your background and seeing how you handle those emotions and issues, we will be unable to assess your ability to reintegrate into society and leave this mental health institution. Let me say again, Richard, no one is immune to breaking down. Your medical records suggest there is a lot going on with you. You are legally disabled. Isn't that right, Richard? After the awkward pause, yes, that's right, but before I could even finish the sentence, Caselli cut me off. Okay, so you recognize you are not operating at full faculties, right, Richard? It seemed to be an awkward silence again. Yes, I do, but Anna Caselli cut me off quickly again. Right. So we know your diagnosed baseline is mild to severe cognitive impairment from an unspecified neurodegenerative disease, most likely frontal-lobe temporal dementia, FTD, but it could be Lewy body disease or amplified by Lewy bodies, or any number of other causes. These diseases often confuse perceptions and even result in hallucinations and failure to control one's impulses or emotions. Caselli was very demanding, assertive, and pretty much telling me the way it was. So, Richard, I think it is safe to say that we know you may have some gaps in recall or have confusion in your memories, and your understanding of events and what you perceived happen may be muddied, may be vague. You may have reached conclusions then that you would not now, maybe not even remember. You could have seen or heard things that were not entirely true or even real. And you could have even forgotten hallucinations. That is what your diagnoses support, Dr. Caselli declared. Let me be brutally honest about your situation, Richard. You could genuinely be suffering a terrible, incurable neurodegenerative disease that is atrophying your brain from an unspecified cause and is manifesting in psychiatric disorders, or you could be suffering from a psychiatric schism break that can be treated. He posited, the bottom line, Richard, which one is better for you? A psychiatric disorder that can be treated, or a death sentence brain degenerative disease? We must treat the psychiatric disorders for what they are, regardless of the cause. There you had it from the renowned Dr. Caselli. I was either crazy because of past traumas triggered by some new trauma that I simply cannot suppress, or I'm just outright crazy because my brain was melting. Either way, he clearly thought I was whacked. I was nuts.